The last garden world of the Vareth burned beneath a sky choked with ash. Once, the planet Vareth Prime had been a masterpiece of botanical engineering, a world where crystal towers rose from forests of silver-leaf trees and every city was a symphony of living architecture. The Vareth had shaped their homeworld across 10,000 years, blending artistry with nature until the line between civilization and ecosystem had ceased to exist. Their cities breathed. Their monuments grew. Their entire culture had been built on the principle that beauty and life were inseparable. Now it was dying. Telvin stood at the viewport of the refugee ship Eternal Bloom, watching his homeworld's final moments. He was old even by Varath standards, his skin the color of aged bark, the bioluminescent patterns that marked his face dim with exhaustion and grief. Behind him, 300 of his people huddled in a cargo hold meant for 50. They were the lucky ones. They had escaped. 4,000 Varath remained alive in the entire galaxy. 4,000 from a population that had once numbered in the billions. The Kryn Dominion had been efficient in their extermination. They wanted the Garden Worlds, those rare planets where Varath expertise had turned barren rocks into paradises. The Kryn were a species that valued expansion above all else. Their philosophy centered on the acquisition of territory and resources. They had offered to purchase the Varath worlds once, offering what they considered generous compensation. When the Varath had politely refused, explaining that their worlds were not commodities but ancestral homes woven into their very identity, the Kryn had returned with warships instead of trade vessels. The first strikes had come without warning. Orbital bombardment, precise and devastating. The Kryn targeted population centers, agricultural hubs, anything that could sustain Varath civilization. There had been no demands for surrender, no ultimatums, just systematic elimination. The Kryn had studied the Varath for decades before attacking. They knew the Varath had no military to speak of, no weapons beyond basic defense systems. The Varath were herbivores, philosophers, artists. They had never conceived of war on such a scale. Telvin had watched his civilization collapse in 14 months. Planet after planet fell silent. Refugee ships fled into the void, only to be hunted down by Kryn patrol cruisers. The survivors scattered across hostile space, hiding in asteroid fields and derelict stations, watching their life support systems fail one by one, knowing rescue would never come. But Telvin had tried anyway. He had sent a message to the Galactic Council, that ancient assembly of spacefaring civilizations that claimed to uphold justice and order among the stars. He had pleaded for intervention, for sanctuary, for anything. He had invoked every treaty, every protocol, every scrap of interstellar law that might compel action. The Council had voted 3 days ago. Telvin had watched the proceedings through a borrowed communications array, had seen the delegates of 40 species debate the fate of his people with clinical detachment. The arguments had been varied, but the conclusion unified. The Sovereign Space Accords prohibited interference in territorial disputes. The Kryn Dominion was a major economic power. Intervention would destabilize the region. The precedent would be dangerous. The Varath situation was tragic but complicated. In the end, 38 species had voted for non-intervention. 1 had abstained, and just one had voted to help. Humanity. Telvin had barely heard of them. A young species, recently admitted to the Council, still finding their place among the ancient civilizations of the galaxy. They controlled a handful of star systems, possessed a modest fleet, and were considered by most to be naive idealists still drunk on their first contact with alien life. Their ambassador, a middle-aged human named Marcus Webb, had given an impassioned speech about moral duty and the obligation to protect the innocent. The other delegates had listened politely and ignored him completely. The vote had been declared. Non-intervention was official council policy. The Varath were on their own. Telvin had cut the transmission and turned to face his people. He had no words of comfort left. They would run until their fuel ran out, until their life support failed, until the Kryn hunters found them. Their species would die not with a bang but with a whimper, suffocating in the dark between stars. That had been 3 days ago. Now watching his homeworld burn, Telvin felt the weight of every one of his 214 years. He was the eldest of the survivors, the keeper of their history, and he would live just long enough to see it all end. The Eternal Bloom had perhaps 2 weeks of life support remaining. The other refugee ships were in similar or worse condition. They had no destination, no haven, no hope. The communications panel behind him chirped. Telvin ignored it. Probably another Kryn vessel demanding their surrender, promising a quick death if they complied. The Kryn had been making such offers for months, as if mercy could be measured in the speed of execution. The panel chirped again, more insistently. One of the younger Varath, a female named Shira, moved to answer it. Her bioluminescent patterns flickered with anxiety. She was barely 30 years old and had spent a quarter of her life fleeing for it. "Elder Telvin," she said quietly. "It's not the Kryn. It is a transmission on an open frequency. They are asking for our location." "Another scavenger," Telvin said bitterly. The galaxy had no shortage of species willing to profit from desperation. "Ignore it. Elder, they are claiming to be from Earth. They say they are here to help." Telvin turned slowly. "Earth, the human homeworld. They are transmitting authentication codes from the Galactic Council database. The signal is legitimate." Hope was a dangerous thing for a dying species. It made the inevitable end more cruel. But Telvin found himself moving to the communications panel anyway, found himself accepting the transmission even though he knew it was probably a trick, a trap, or worst of all, a misunderstanding that would lead nowhere. The face that appeared on the screen was undeniably human. Strong features, dark skin, hair cropped short in a military style. The human wore a uniform Telvin did not recognize, dark blue with silver insignia. Behind him, a ship's bridge bustled with activity. "This is Captain David Reeves of the Earth vessel Indomitable Will," the human said. His voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone used to command. "We are receiving your distress beacon. Please transmit your exact coordinates and the status of your fleet. We are here to get you out." Telvin stared at the screen. "Captain Reeves, I do not understand. The Council voted against intervention. Your ambassador was outvoted." "The Council voted," Reeves agreed. "Earth did not. Now, with respect, sir, we are operating on a tight schedule. There are Kryn hunter groups in this sector, and I would prefer to have you loaded and jumping to faster than light travel before they realize we are here. How many ships in your fleet and how many souls aboard?" The word souls struck Telvin as oddly poignant. Not units, not refugees, not population count. Souls. 14 ships, Telvin heard himself say. 4,017 individuals total. "Captain, you need to understand what you are risking. The Kryn will consider this an act of war. The Council will condemn you. There will be consequences." Reeves smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "Let me worry about the consequences. You just worry about getting your people ready to transfer. We have brought enough transport capacity for everyone, and our medical teams are standing by. Some of your ships look like they are running on fumes and prayers." "We are," Shira said, speaking for the first time, her voice cracked with emotion. "We have 2 weeks of life support remaining, maybe less." "Then we got here just in time," Reeves said. "Transmitting rendezvous coordinates now. We will begin transfer operations in 1 hour. Captain Reeves out." The transmission ended. Telvin stood in silence, staring at the blank screen. Around him, the Varath began to stir, whispers spreading through the cargo hold. Could it be real? Had someone actually come? "Elder," Shira said softly. "What do we do?" Telvin thought about his burning homeworld, about the thousands already dead, about the weight of being the last keeper of Varath history. He thought about the Council's cold deliberations and humanity's lone dissenting vote. He thought about this Captain Reeves, who had crossed hostile space to reach them, who spoke of souls rather than refugees. "We transmit our coordinates," Telvin said, "and we pray that humans are as good as their word." 12 light-years away, in a conference room on Earth, Secretary General James Cassen watched the same transmission Telvin had witnessed 3 days prior. He had watched it 17 times now, memorizing every face, every vote, every carefully worded justification for abandoning an entire species to extinction. Cassen was 63 years old, a career diplomat who had spent 40 years navigating the treacherous waters of international politics before Earth's unification, and another 10 learning to navigate the even more complex realm of interstellar relations. He was tall and lean, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that came from too many late nights and difficult decisions. He had negotiated Earth's entry into the Galactic Council, had fought to establish humanity as a legitimate voice among civilizations that measured their histories in millennia rather than centuries. He had also been a history professor before entering politics, and he knew exactly what happened when good people did nothing. Ambassador Webb sat across from him, still wearing his council formal attire, looking exhausted and angry. Webb was younger, 45, with the kind of earnest intensity that either burned out quickly or forged itself into something unbreakable. He had delivered the speech advocating for Verath intervention with everything he had, knowing it would fail, doing it anyway because someone had to. They did not even debate it seriously, Webb said quietly. The moment the Kryn indicated they would consider intervention an act of aggression, 30 species fell in line. The others hid behind the Sovereign Space Accords like they were gospel, instead of guidelines written by species who wanted to avoid accountability. The Accords serve a purpose, Kassin said, though his tone suggested he was playing devil's advocate rather than believing it. Without them, larger powers could justify any intervention as humanitarian. The Verath are being systematically exterminated. If that does not qualify as humanitarian crisis, what does? Webb slammed his hand on the table. We have the capability to help. We have ships, we have resources, we have. I know what we have, Kassin interrupted gently, and I know what it will cost. Webb stopped, reading something in Kassin's expression. Sir, Kassin stood and walked to the window. Outside, the lights of Geneva sparkled in the evening darkness. Earth's united government housed in what had once been the home of failed international cooperation. Humanity had learned hard lessons about the price of inaction. 2 world wars, countless regional conflicts, environmental disasters that had nearly destroyed the biosphere. Humanity's own history was written in blood and regret. I have been reviewing our fleet disposition, Kassin said. We have 27 deep space-capable vessels that could reach Verath space within a week. We have transport capacity for perhaps 5,000 individuals if we retrofit some of our colony ships. We have medical facilities and supplies sufficient to handle mass casualty scenarios. He paused. And we have the political will to do what is necessary. Consequences be damned. Webb stood slowly. You are authorizing a rescue operation. I'm authorizing a gross violation of the Sovereign Space Accords, multiple trade treaties, and probably a dozen interstellar laws I am not even aware of, Kassin corrected. I am authorizing an action that will likely get us expelled from the Galactic Council, that will damage our relationships with major trading partners, and that could potentially start a war we are not equipped to fight. He turned to face Webb. And I am doing it anyway, because if we do not, we are complicit in genocide. So yes, Ambassador, I am authorizing a rescue operation. The Council will condemn us. Let them, we are not doing this for the Council's approval. The Kryn will retaliate, probably, but they will have to think carefully about attacking Earth directly. We might be young and naive, but we are not defenseless, and they know it. Webb was quiet for a moment. You understand this could end your career, could end both our careers. Kassin smiled without humor. I did not take this job to make safe decisions, Marcus. I took it because someone has to make the hard ones. And if humanity's reputation in the galaxy is built on abandoning people to die because it is politically convenient, then we do not deserve a reputation at all. He pressed a button on his desk. Get me Admiral Rodriguez and Captain Reeves. Scramble order Priority Alpha. And Marcus, start drafting our official response to the Council. Something diplomatic but firm. They are going to ask us to reconsider. What should I tell them? Tell them we already considered. Tell them we chose conscience over convenience. And tell them if they have a problem with that, they are welcome to expel us. We will survive. Webb nodded and left to begin drafting. Kassin remained at the window, looking out at the city lights and thinking about 4,000 people he had never met, would probably never meet, but whose lives had just become Earth's responsibility. It was a strange thing, he reflected, how quickly moral clarity could emerge from political complexity. The council had debated for hours, had weighed 1,000 factors, had ultimately concluded that inaction was the rational choice. Humanity had looked at the same situation and reached a different conclusion in minutes. Perhaps that was the benefit of being new to the galactic community. They had not yet learned how to rationalize looking away. Or perhaps Cassin thought they had simply learned different lessons from their own bloody history. Never again. How many times had humanity said those words? How many times had they failed to live up to them? Not this time. This time, someone had called for help and humanity was going to answer, even if it cost them everything. The rendezvous in the outer veil took 6 hours. Captain David Reeves stood on the bridge of the Indomitable Will, watching his tactical display as 14 Varath vessels limped toward the human fleet. Some of them were barely holding together, fusion cores running on emergency power, life support systems cycling recycled air for the dozenth time. It was a miracle they had survived this long. Reeves was 51 years old, a career military officer who had commanded ships during Earth's last major conflict in the Titan uprising 15 years prior. He was stocky and broad-shouldered, with brown hair going gray at the temples and the kind of calm competence that came from decades of keeping crews alive in hostile environments. He had seen combat, had lost people under his command, had learned the hard way that leadership meant making decisions others did not have the stomach for. This was one of those decisions. "Status on the Kryn Hunter groups," he asked his tactical officer. Lieutenant Park checked her displays. "3 groups in the sector, sir. Nearest is approximately 4 light hours away, moving on a parallel vector. They do not seem to have detected us yet. Let us keep it that way. Helm, bring us to station keeping distance from the Varath fleet. Communications, open a channel to all Varath vessels." The channel opened. Reeves saw 14 view screens appear on his display, each showing a Varath captain or elder. They all looked exhausted, desperate, and deeply suspicious that this was too good to be true. "Captains, elders, this is Reeves. Here is how this is going to work. We are going to move through your fleet in sequence, dock with each vessel, and transfer your people to our transports. We have brought medical teams, supplies, and enough life support capacity to keep everyone comfortable during the journey back to human space. The transfer will take approximately 4 hours. I need you all to begin preparing your people for evacuation immediately." One of the Varath, an older male Reeves recognized as Telvin from the initial communication, spoke up. "Captain Reeves, our ships contain our entire remaining cultural archive. Genetic samples from our homeworlds, art, history, everything that remains of our civilization. We cannot leave these vessels without preserving that data." "Understood, Elder Telvin. We are bringing portable storage systems that can interface with your computers. We will copy everything. Nothing gets left behind." Another Varath captain, younger and more skeptical, asked, "And if the Kryn detect us during the transfer?" "Then my combat ships screen the transports while we finish loading. We do not leave anyone behind, Captain. That is not how we operate." The Varath exchanged glances, their bioluminescent patterns flickering in what Reeves had learned was a form of non-verbal communication. Finally, Telvin spoke for them all. "We accept your terms, Captain Reeves, and we thank you. The Council abandoned us, but you came anyway. Why?" Reeves had known this question was coming. He had thought about his answer during the week-long journey from Earth. There were complicated geopolitical reasons, philosophical arguments about moral obligations, strategic considerations about humanity's place in the galaxy. But in the end, the real answer was simpler. "Because it was the right thing to do," Reeves said. "That is all the reason we needed." The transfer operations began 20 minutes later. Human boarding teams moved through the Varath vessels with practiced efficiency, helping the refugees gather their belongings, providing medical assistance to those who needed it, carefully cataloging and preserving every piece of cultural data they could find. The Varath watched in something like amazement as these strange bipedal aliens treated them not like burdens, but like people worth saving. Reeves moved through the operations with constant vigilance, watching his tactical displays for any sign of Kryn ships, coordinating with his fleet to maximize efficiency. They had 4,000 people to evacuate and maybe 6 hours before their luck ran out. 3 hours into the transfer, luck ran out. "Contact," Lieutenant Park announced sharply. Kryn Hunter Group dropping out of faster-than-light travel bearing 270 Mark 15. 3 vessels, frigate class. "They are hailing us, sir." "Put them through," Reeves ordered calmly, though his heart rate kicked up several notches. The Kryn commander appeared on screen. The Kryn were an imposing species, tall and heavily built, with chitinous exoskeletons and multiple compound eyes. This one wore military insignia that marked him as high-ranking. "Human vessel, you are in violation of Kryn territorial space and are interfering with internal Dominion affairs. Cease your operations immediately and depart, or we will be forced to take action." Reeves met the Kryn's multiple eyes with steady calm. "Commander, we are conducting a humanitarian rescue operation in neutral space. The Outer Veil is not Kryn territory by any recognized treaty. We will be departing as soon as our operations are complete. The Verath are subjects of an ongoing military action. Interfering with that action is an act of war. The Verath are refugees seeking asylum, which is their right under galactic law. Attacking refugees is genocide, which is illegal under the same law." Reeves kept his voice level. "Commander, I do not want to fight, I just want to save some lives. Once we are done here, we will leave and you will never see us again." The Kryn commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been anger or amusement. "And if we insist you leave now, then you will have to come through my fleet to reach the transports. And I promise you, Commander, that will be expensive." Reeves leaned forward slightly. "Your choice. Let us finish our work and we disappear, or start a shooting war with Earth over a few thousand refugees. How do you think your superiors will react to either outcome?" The standoff lasted 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. Then the Kryn commander cut the transmission without another word. His ships held their position but did not advance. "Keep monitoring them," Reeves ordered, "and speed up the transfer. I do not think they are going to wait forever." They finished in 2 hours and 43 minutes. Every Verath, every piece of cultural data, every genetic sample and art piece and historical record was loaded aboard the human transports. The Verath ships, now empty hulls, were set to self-destruct on timers that would trigger after the fleet departed. Telvin was the last to board. He stood at the airlock of the Eternal Bloom, looking back at the ship that had been his home and prison for these last desperate months. Then he stepped across the threshold onto the human transport vessel, and a young human medical officer handed him something warm to drink and asked if he needed anything for pain or anxiety. "I need to speak with Captain Reeves," Telvin said. They brought him to the bridge. Reeves turned from his tactical display and offered a human gesture Telvin had learned meant greeting and respect. "Elder Telvin, everyone is aboard and accounted for. We are preparing to jump to faster-than-light travel." "Captain, those Kryn ships are still out there. They will follow us. They will try, but we have got a head start and we are faster. By the time they report our position and their fleet mobilizes, we will be 3 jumps ahead." Reeves smiled slightly. "Do not worry, we are getting you home safe." "Home," Telvin repeated quietly. "We have no home anymore, Captain. Our worlds are gone." Reeves was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Secretary General Kassan asked me to extend an offer. Earth has several colony worlds in development, places where we are still working on terraforming and ecosystem development. Your people are famous for your botanical expertise. We could use that knowledge, and you need a place to rebuild. If you are interested, we would like to offer you sanctuary, not as refugees but as partners." Telvin felt something he had not felt in months, something that felt dangerously like hope. "You would share your worlds with us." "We would share our future with you," Reeves corrected. "Your species nearly died because the galaxy decided you were not worth saving. Earth disagrees, and we are prepared to put our resources where our convictions are. But the Council will condemn you. The Kryn will retaliate. You are risking so much for strangers." Reeves met his eyes. "You are only strangers until someone takes the time to know you. After that, you are just people who needed help. And where we come from, you do not let people die because helping them is inconvenient." Telvin's bioluminescent patterns flickered with emotion he could not put into words. "I accept, Captain. On behalf of my people, I accept your offer, and I swear to you we will remember this. The Varath will remember that when we cried out, only Earth answered." "Just remember that the galaxy has room for everyone," Reeves said. "Now strap in, Elder. It is going to be a long trip home." The human fleet jumped to faster than light travel 17 minutes later. Behind them, the empty Varath ships detonated one by one, erasing the last traces of their passage. The Kryn hunters moved to investigate, but by then the human ships were gone, lost in the vast darkness between stars. The journey back to human space took 11 days. During that time, the storm Kassan had predicted began to break over Earth's diplomatic core with all the fury of a Category 5 hurricane. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within hours of learning about humanity's rescue operation. Ambassador Webb stood before the assembled delegates, knowing his career was likely over, but finding he did not particularly care. The chamber was an impressive space, designed to accommodate dozens of species with wildly different environmental needs. It was ancient, built by civilizations that had achieved spaceflight when humanity was still figuring out agriculture. The weight of that history hung heavy in the recycled air. The Kryn delegate spoke first, his translated voice crackling with fury. "The humans have committed an act of war against the Dominion. They entered our territorial space, interfered with internal affairs, and stole property legally claimed by conquest. We demand they return the Varath immediately and submit to arbitration, or face the consequences." Webb remained calm. "The Outer Veil is neutral space by the Treaty of Ashken Prime, which the Dominion itself ratified. Earth interfered with nothing except genocide, which violates 17 different Council protocols. As for returning the Varath, that is impossible. They have been granted asylum under Earth law, and we do not extradite refugees to face extermination." A Trellan delegate, one of the species that had voted for non-intervention, spoke up. Her translated voice carried tones of concern. "Ambassador Webb, we understand your species is young and perhaps unfamiliar with the complexities of interstellar politics, but your actions have violated the Sovereign Space Accords. You cannot simply intervene in disputes whenever your emotions dictate." With respect, Delegate Suron, this was not a dispute. It was systematic extermination of a sentient species. And yes, we can intervene when we witness genocide. In fact, we are morally obligated to. "By whose moral authority?" demanded the Helkin delegate. "The Council voted for non-intervention. You were outvoted. The democratic process was followed." Webb felt his patience beginning to fray. Democracy does not sanctify inaction in the face of atrocity. If 40 species vote to watch a genocide happen, that does not make the genocide acceptable. It makes all 40 species complicit. The chamber erupted in indignation. Multiple delegates began speaking at once, their translated voices overlapping in a cacophony of outrage. The council moderator, an ancient being of the Thallan Concordat, called for order. "Ambassador Webb," the moderator said once silence had been restored, "your accusations are inflammatory and inappropriate. The council takes its responsibilities seriously. We voted for non-intervention based on careful analysis of the situation, consideration of precedent, and respect for sovereign boundaries. Your species' unilateral action undermines the entire framework that maintains peace in this galaxy. Then perhaps that framework needs to be re-examined," Webb said quietly. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like a system designed to let powerful species do whatever they want while everyone else watches and claims their hands are tied." "How dare you? The Varath sent you a desperate plea for help," Webb continued, his voice rising. "They showed you the evidence of their extermination. They invoked every law, every treaty, every scrap of moral authority the Council claims to represent. And you debated for 3 hours and voted to let them die. You know what Earth debated for? 20 minutes. That is how long it took us to decide that saving lives was more important than political convenience." "Earth is young and inexperienced," another delegate interjected. "You do not understand the complexities. I understand that 4,000 people would be dead if we shared your understanding," Webb shot back. I understand that your complexity is just another word for cowardice, and I understand that if the price of being part of this council is learning to rationalize genocide, then maybe we are better off expelled. The moderator's voice carried the weight of centuries. Ambassador Webb, you are out of order. The Council will now vote on sanctions against Earth for violating the Sovereign Space Accords. All delegates, prepare your votes. Webb stood alone at the podium, watching the delegates prepare to condemn his species for doing what none of them had the courage to do. He thought about Reeves and his fleet, about the Verath refugees now safe in human space, about Cassin's willingness to sacrifice Earth standing for the sake of doing what was right. He thought about humanity's history, about all the times they had failed to act when action was needed, about the genocides and atrocities they had watched happen while claiming their hands were tied. Earth had learned those lessons in blood and ash. Apparently, the rest of the galaxy had not. The vote began. One by one, the delegates registered their condemnation of Earth's actions. 37 species voted for sanctions. 2 abstained. And then something unexpected happened. The Velen Confederacy votes against sanctions, announced a delegate. Webb had not expected to break ranks. The Velans were a small species with little political power, but they were known for their fierce independence. The Sarth Coalition votes against sanctions, said another delegate. The Martin Federation votes against sanctions. One by one, smaller species began breaking from the consensus. They were species with little power, little influence, species that had learned what it meant to be vulnerable in a galaxy run by major powers. They saw in humanity's actions something that resonated with their own histories. The final tally, 37 for sanctions, 11 against, 3 abstaining. Sanctions passed, but the unity was broken. The message was sent. Some species, at least, believed Earth had done the right thing. The moderator called the session to order. Earth is hereby sanctioned for violation of the Sovereign Space Accords. Trade restrictions will be implemented, diplomatic privileges reduced, and Earth's voting rights in the Council suspended for 1 standard year. This session is concluded. Webb left the chamber to find a message waiting from Cassin. It contained only 3 words: "Well done, Marcus." The news spread across the galaxy at the speed of faster-than-light communications. Humanity had broken Council law to rescue the Verath. The Council had responded with sanctions. The Kryn were demanding restitution. It should have been a straightforward condemnation of rogue behavior. Instead, something strange began to happen. On Velen Prime, protests erupted outside the government complex. Citizens marched carrying signs that read "They saved lives while we watched, and humanity showed us our cowardice." The Velen government, which had supported sanctions, found itself facing a political crisis. On Martin 6, the largest civilian station in Martin space, dockworkers refused to enforce the trade sanctions against human vessels. "We are not punishing people for saving lives," their union representative announced. Across dozens of worlds, billions of individuals watched the footage that had leaked from the rescue operation. They saw human crew members treating Verath refugees with gentleness and respect. They saw Captain Reeves standing down Kryn warships to protect people he had never met. They saw a species that had joined the galactic community barely 50 years ago, teaching the older civilizations a lesson about moral courage. The political impact was seismic. Governments that had voted for sanctions found themselves facing angry populations. The Council's carefully maintained consensus began to fracture along lines no one had predicted. And through it all, Earth remained quietly defiant. Cassin gave no apologies, made no excuses, offered no concessions. When pressed by diplomatic channels to explain humanity's actions, his response was always the same: "We did what needed to be done. We would do it again." The Kryn Dominion, watching the shifting political landscape, made a careful calculation. They had wanted the Verath's garden worlds, and they had them. The Verath themselves were now scattered in human space, no longer a threat or obstacle. Pressing the issue further would only generate more sympathy for Earth and more criticism of Kryn methods. They quietly announced they would not pursue further action against the Verath refugees, claiming the matter was closed. It was as close to an admission of defeat as the Dominion was capable of making. 6 weeks after the rescue, the Galactic Council reconvened for a regular session. The atmosphere was tense, charged with unspoken conflicts and shifting alliances. Ambassador Webb took his seat in Earth's designated area, noting the empty chairs around him. Sanctions meant isolation, at least officially. The session began with routine business, trade agreements and territorial disputes, and the mundane machinery of interstellar governance. Then the moderator announced an unexpected item on the agenda. The Then Collective has requested permission to address the Council regarding the Varath situation. Webb sat up straighter. The Then were one of the oldest species in the Council, ancient even by galactic standards. They rarely spoke, preferring to observe and vote with silent wisdom. When they did speak, everyone listened. The Then delegate rose slowly. She was ancient, her crystalline form showing the fractures and repairs of millennia. Her translated voice was soft but carried absolute clarity. "I have served on this council for 400 of your standard years," she began. "I have watched civilizations rise and fall. I have seen peace negotiated and wars declared. I have witnessed the best and worst that sentient species can offer." She paused, her crystalline structure refracting light in complex patterns. "I have also watched us become cowards." The chamber fell absolutely silent. The Varath situation was not complex. It was genocide. We knew it was genocide. We possessed the evidence, the capability to intervene, and the moral obligation to act. We chose not to, hiding behind protocols designed to excuse inaction rather than encourage justice. She turned slowly, her gaze sweeping the assembly. And then humanity, the youngest and supposedly most naive species in this chamber, did what we would not. They acted. They saved lives. They risked their political standing and economic security to do what was right. "The Then voted for non-intervention," someone pointed out quietly. "We did," the Then delegate agreed. "And we were wrong." "I was wrong. We prioritized stability over justice, political convenience over moral duty. We told ourselves the situation was complicated when in truth, it was devastatingly simple. People were dying and we had the power to save them. Humanity understood that. Why did we not?" The Kryn delegate attempted to interject, but the Then continued without acknowledging him. "I propose that this council formally recognize the Varath as a protected species under our jurisdiction. I further propose we grant them full rights and representation. And finally, I propose we review the Sovereign Space Accords to ensure they cannot be used again as an excuse for inaction in the face of atrocity." "The proposal is seconded," came the immediate response from another ancient delegate. The Council's procedural rules meant the proposals would have to be voted on. The debate that followed was heated, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The public pressure, the shifting political landscape, and the moral weight of the Then's words combined to create an irresistible momentum. When the votes were tallied, all three proposals passed by significant margins. The Varath, 4,000 survivors of a near extinction, were granted council recognition and protection. It was too late to save their worlds, but it ensured they would have a voice in the galaxy's future. The sanctions against Earth were quietly lifted 3 months later, buried in administrative language about mutual understanding and renewed cooperation. No one explicitly admitted they had been wrong, but the message was clear enough. Earth's reputation, far from being damaged, had fundamentally transformed. They were no longer the naive newcomers, the species that needed guidance from their elders. They were the conscience that had shown the galaxy what it had become and what it could be again. On the colony world designated New Eden, 18 months after the rescue, Telvin walked through gardens that had not existed a year ago. The Varath had taken to their new home with the same passionate dedication they had brought to their lost worlds. Already, silverleaf trees rose from carefully tended soil, their branches reaching toward an alien sun that was learning to feel like home. 4,000 had become 4,200. The first generation of Varath born free from the shadow of extinction. Small, fragile shoots of hope taking root in foreign soil. Telvin was older now, feeling every one of his 216 years, but his bioluminescent patterns glowed brighter than they had in the dark days of fleeing through space. He carried a small package under one arm, wrapped in cloth woven from fibers the Verath had brought with them from their last refugee ship. It was one of the few physical artifacts that had survived the Exodus. Secretary General Kassin met him at the human settlement on the other side of the valley. The man had aged too, Telvin thought. The silver hair had more white in it now. The lines around his eyes had deepened. The cost of leadership written on human features the same way it was written on Verath patterns. Elder Telvin, Kassin said, offering the human gesture of greeting that Telvin had learned meant respect between equals. Your message said you had something important to discuss. I do, Telvin said. But first I have something to give you. He unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a crystal sphere, no larger than a human fist, that seemed to capture and refract light in impossible ways. It pulsed gently with its own internal luminescence, colors shifting through spectrums that human eyes could barely perceive. This is a memory stone, Telvin explained. It is one of the oldest artifacts of my people. It was carried by my ancestors for 3,000 years, passed from keeper to keeper, recording the most significant moments of our history. He held it out to Kassin. I am giving it to you. Kassin hesitated. Elder, I cannot accept something so precious. This belongs to your people. It does, Telvin agreed. Which is why I am giving it to you. You are part of our people now, James Kassin. You and every human who chose to act when the galaxy chose to watch. Your Captain Reeves, who stood between us and annihilation. Your Ambassador Webb, who spoke for us when we had no voice. The young medical officer who gave me something warm to drink and asked if I needed anything for pain or anxiety. His patterns flickered with deep emotion. You saved us, not because there was profit in it, not because we could offer you anything in return, but because you looked at strangers dying in the dark and said someone has to help. He pressed the memory stone into Kassin's hands. I have added the story of our rescue to this stone. Future generations of Verath will know what humanity did when the rest of the galaxy turned away. And they will know that there are species in this universe who value life over law, conscience over convenience, doing what is right over doing what is easy. Kassin held the stone carefully, feeling its warmth against his palms. We did what anyone should have done. But they did not, Telvin said quietly. That is the point. They did not and you did. That matters. It will always matter. They stood together in silence for a moment, two old males from different worlds, watching Verath children play in gardens that should not exist, on a world that had become sanctuary when all sanctuary had been denied. The Council wants to meet with you, Kassin said finally. They want to discuss what they are calling the new principles. Guidelines for humanitarian intervention that balance sovereignty with moral obligation. Will you attend? Yes. Ambassador Webb is drafting our position now. We want to make sure the new protocols have teeth, that they cannot be ignored the next time a species faces what yours did. The next time, Telvin repeated. You think there will be a next time? The galaxy is a big place, Kassin said. And history suggests that people who have power will abuse it, and people who are vulnerable will need help. We cannot save everyone, but we can try to build a system that makes it harder to look away. Telvin's patterns shifted to something that might have been approval or sadness or both. You have learned the lesson that cost my people everything. That neutrality in the face of oppression is not neutrality at all. It is complicity dressed in prettier words. We learned it from our own history, Kassin admitted. We just had to remember it when it mattered. Far above them, in orbit around New Eden, human and Verath ships moved in coordinated patterns. The joint fleet that had been established to protect the colony from any potential Kryn retaliation that never came. The Dominion had made its calculations and decided that 4,000 refugees were not worth the political cost of attacking Earth's newest allies. In the council chambers, debates continued about the Verath situation and its implications. Some species argued that humanity had set a dangerous precedent, that every conflict would now invite intervention justified as humanitarian. Others pointed to the Verath gardens growing on New Eden and asked what price was too high to pay for those lives. The Thin Collective, having broken their customary silence, continued to speak. They pushed for reforms, for accountability, for a system that valued life over political convenience. They had seen what the young species had shown them, and they refused to forget. Ambassador Webb found himself with unexpected allies. The smaller species that had voted against sanctions formed a loose coalition, advocating for changes that would make the Council more responsive to humanitarian crises. They called themselves the Conscience Bloc, a name that made Webb smile every time he heard it. The Kryn Dominion grew quieter in Council proceedings. They had gotten what they wanted, the Varath worlds emptied and ready for colonization, but they had paid for it in reputation. Trade agreements were harder to negotiate. Other species watched them with new wariness. They had won their victory and found it hollow. And Earth, the young species that had barely understood galactic politics, had become something unexpected. Not a military power, though their fleet had proven capable. Not an economic juggernaut, though their industries were growing. But a moral force, a species that other civilizations looked to when questions of right and wrong needed answering. It was not the role Kassan had imagined when he had authorized the rescue operation, but it was the role humanity seemed determined to fill. In the gardens of New Eden, Telvin placed his hand against one of the silver-leaf trees his people had managed to grow from the genetic samples they had saved. It was young, barely 3 meters tall, but it was alive and growing. In a few decades, it would tower over the valley. In a few centuries, forests of them would cover the hillsides. The Varath would endure. They would rebuild. They would remember. And they would teach their children about the day humanity came when no one else would, about the humans who broke every law to save strangers, about the species that chose conscience over convenience and proved that sometimes the right thing to do was simply to act. The galaxy would remember too. For better or worse, the Varath rescue had changed the calculations that civilizations made when faced with atrocity. It was no longer enough to hide behind protocols and claim your hands were tied. Earth had shown there was always a choice, and choosing to help, even at great cost, was the choice that defined not just a species but their place in the community of sentient beings. Telvin looked up at the sky, where human ships stood watch, where somewhere beyond the stars the Council still debated the implications of what had happened. He thought about the 14 refugee ships fleeing through darkness, about the moment Captain Reeves's face had appeared on their screen, about the impossible hope that someone had actually come. "Thank you," he whispered to the alien sky. "Thank you for coming when you did not have to. Thank you for caring when no one else would. Thank you for being what the galaxy needed, even if the galaxy did not know it yet." The wind rustled through the silver leaves, carrying the scent of growing things and new beginnings. In the distance, Varath and human children played together, learning each other's languages, building friendships that would shape both species for generations to come. The galaxy had abandoned them to die. But Earth had chosen to remember what the rest had forgotten, that every life mattered, that every species deserved a chance to survive, that sometimes breaking the rules was the only way to honor the principles those rules were supposed to represent. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference.